I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we did 4 full episodes on the Delphi murders, and boy, did you have some thoughts. We address them today on the Prosecutors. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined with my incomparable co-host, Alice. Hello, Alice.
Hi, Brett. It's so good to talk to you. I got to see you all day, but it's just different when I get to talk to you at night, too.
I know, it's true. Alice and I did spend all day together today at work,
long.
So that was fun. Yeah, we're just waiting for the inevitable COVID outbreak to shut down our office, but for now, everything's going fine. Alice, I hope you had an excellent Thanksgiving.
It was great. Thanks for asking. It was relaxing, and there was so many leftovers because in, doing our duty for minimizing super spreader events, it was a small Thanksgiving, which just means more food for me.
There you go. They got those growing children who need all the food they can get, too.
Oh, I fight them for it.
Well, we had a good Thanksgiving as well. Yes, I know. Well, my mom, she's quite the cook, so it was a good one. I enjoyed it, but now it's back to the real world, back to the podcast. Today, we've got everybody's comments on the Delphi episodes, and I just got to say, the feedback on the Delphi episodes was insane. You guys, man, I don't know, Alice, just YouTube alone was stunning.
Oh, absolutely. You guys blew us away. So I'm a little bit nerdy, and I like to stay up until midnight when the episode drops on YouTube. And usually when I go click on it, there's 0 views. Makes sense. Most people don't stay up to listen to it. But oh my goodness, this time I would click, a few minutes after, and there'd already be like dozens, hundreds of views. I couldn't believe how fast y'all got to listening to it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's insane. I know a lot of you are probably watching us on YouTube right now. And obviously we're a young podcast. We're a new podcast, new kids on the block. So I'm sure there's some podcasts that are like, oh, whatever, we get 50,000 views in our first hour or whatnot. But for us, it was really awesome. And it was great to see just how involved you guys are in this case, how many comments you were leaving and the thoughtful suggestions and information you were sharing. And that's one reason we decided we would go ahead and do this follow-up episode and just focus on Delphi and talk about Delphi, for another 45 minutes or so in just sort of a freestyle way, talk about some of the things you guys brought up and address some of your comments, address some of your criticisms, some of your concerns, some of your thoughts, some of your theories about this case.
And Brett, we've talked about this a lot, but part of the reason we wanted to do a follow-up so quickly is I was incredibly impressed with the civility of the Delphi community. I think there are lots of sub-communities for a lot of the stories and episodes that we do, but the Delphi one, I don't think I was as familiar with before, and I truly expected after our 4 episodes that we would get a lot of criticism, a lot of hate mail, frankly, because I know that passions run high with this case, as we have noted many times before. But while people had very set views and very heated discussions, it was all so civil. And I think if you see a lot of the discussions on the YouTube page, that's kind of a model with how a lot of these discussions should be taking place virtually.
The angriest people on our cases are the Missy Beavers people, which is kind of weird. The Maura Murray community is a trip unto itself, but the Missy Beavers people are just mean. I mean, I don't know if you ever look at some of the comments on our YouTube page for Missy Beavers, but there are just some angry people on there. But you're right. When it came to Delphi, and there were people who warned us about Delphi, who said, you're going to do this case and you're going to get a lot of hate and just be prepared for it. And that just didn't happen. I mean, there were obviously people who didn't like what we did, but it was, I think, overwhelmingly civil. And I think you can tell just how much people care about this case and how what they really want is to get this case solved. You know, that's what people want when it comes to this case. And I think there's a lot of passion there, but it's so far at least good passion. I think it's channeled in a really good way. And so we definitely want to talk more about that. A couple things just real quick that people mentioned I wanted to run through. We talked about in one episode whether or not you could hear whatever was going on down where the girls were murdered from the bridge and other areas. And apparently people have done scream tests and you can hear everything very well. So I think that's one thing we assumed was true, that you would be able to hear that. As we said, Kelsey obviously heard people searching where the girls were found when that was going on. So we thought you probably could. Turns out you absolutely could. And I just think that once again sort of goes to the mystery of this case and how quickly this crime had to be committed. It didn't take very long. And if the girls did make noise, if they screamed, if they fought, it would happen in a very narrow time frame when there was nobody on that bridge and it was well before anybody started looking for them. People speculate all sorts of things, that the girls were taken away from the crime scene and the crime happened somewhere else and they were brought back. That didn't happen. I'll just go ahead and tell you. That just didn't happen for a lot of different reasons. Number one, that's an incredibly dangerous thing for the murderer to do, to take the people away and then bring them back while there's a search going on. Really good way to get caught. Number two, this person would then have had to move the bodies, which is not easy. I don't care if they are kids. And we talked about how Libby, at least, weighed more like an adult. So they were killed where they were found. The police have basically said that. I think we can be sure of that. So that means these murders happened in such a quick time frame that any noise that was made, nobody heard. And we thought that was true, but I just wanted to go ahead and let you guys know that has pretty much been confirmed.
Right. Thanks for the commenters who pointed that out. And I think we had reached that conclusion in one of our later episodes as well, that in fact you would be able to hear anyone from that based on the search party locating the shoe and yelling up to where Kelsey's search party was.
A lot of people asked whether or not this could have been a teacher. We talked about in our fourth episode and in our short follow-up that we did think he could be a teacher because of the command in the voice and the experience that a person like that would have had with children. But people pointed out another reason to think it could be a teacher, and I'm interested to see what you think about this, Alice, and that's that it was a snow day, and we talked about how it was a snow day, and we talked about how the murderer would know the kids would be out there because it was a snow day. But people pointed out, if you don't have kids and you're not a teacher, you might not know it was a snow day. That would not be something that the average person would necessarily know when the snow day falls on the school's calendar. A couple things about that. If you're somebody who's looking to kill kids, maybe you pay more attention to the calendar than your average person. But that's actually a good point. I don't know what you think about that point, Alice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more, it could be a teacher more so because of the authority in the voice and because of the command and ease with which with which Bridge Guy directed the girls. Even if it were a teacher, I think we've made this clear in our episodes, I still do not think the girls knew the guy. Now, with respect to the teacher potentially knowing that, you know, it's a snow day, I think that's possible. But having lived in a couple of small towns and towns of just a couple thousand people where cows outnumber people, I can say that even if you do not have children or you do not work in the school system, it's such a small town that news about school days are typically on the local news. Now, I don't know that to be the case in Delphi, but having lived in a couple of very small towns, I know that if you even switch on the radio, it's one of the leading stories. Well, kids in this town are excited about the snow day tomorrow. So while I think that's a good theory that a teacher would know what the academic calendar looks like, with Delphi being so small, I think it was probably common knowledge or could have been easily ascertained, especially if your victim base was going to be minors, and minors are typically in school. So again, a good thought, but I am not sure it would be my number one reason for thinking this is a teacher. But again, for the reasons we've stated, I do think it's potentially someone like a teacher who has a background in, directing children to do, to instruct children.
No, I do think it's a good thought, and I will say this. I would be very surprised if, given the size of the community, the police had not looked pretty hard at anybody who worked as a teacher in the area. Still could be a teacher, could be a retired teacher, could be a teacher from outside the community. If it was an active teacher, I think that's probably less likely, though. Good thought and way to think about the case and to think about sort of the details. I thought that was a pretty interesting thought, and a good thought when you're trying to figure out how would this person know to go there in the first place, particularly since it seems like they obviously went there to kill. They went there with a weapon ready that they then used. So it would make sense that they needed to know that this was actually a fertile hunting ground, that there would be people there that day, and that they could expect to find some kids there. Now, it's possible that they actually were getting there a little early and expected the murder, to the extent it happened, if they're there hunting, that after school, they might not even have known the school was out. So they get there around 1 or 2. They're going to scope the place out a little bit, see what all is going on. The kids are going to get off from school around 3. There'll be some kids who come down to the trails. Maybe they run across somebody. That's perfectly possible. And they get there and it's like, Disney World or whatever. And there are all these kids there and they struck while the iron was hot, as it were. That's possible. I think more likely Alice is right. They lived in the community. They knew that this was going to be a snow day, and that was why they went there in the first place. One thing we talked about a lot that some people pushed back on was, we think this person's a local. We definitely think they're a local. Just don't think there's any question about that. Everybody knows about Delphi now. They know about those trails now. At the time, from talking to Kelsey, it just wasn't a place people knew about. People didn't know about these trails. And if you were Googling a place to go, the Delphi trails probably wouldn't even come up. They weren't famous outside of Delphi. And that's one big reason we just don't think that some random person stumbled upon this place. And we also talked about being comfortable where you kill and how most serial killers do that. There is the sort of exception that proves the rule that people brought up again and again, and that's Israel Keys, who is a famous serial killer who is the antithesis of most serial killers. He almost never killed anywhere he was from. He killed far from home. He never killed in the same place twice. He kept his phone turned off. He paid for everything in cash. He was very smart. He was very savvy. He knew how to avoid the police. I think in one case, he flew to Chicago, I think, and then drove 1,000 miles to Vermont, where he murdered somebody with a kill kit that he had prepared years before that he just had in the area. Okay, that happened. Israel Keys is a person. He's a real serial killer. Most serial killers don't do that. The chances of this being another Israel Keys type person are incredibly small. Most likely, this is somebody from the area.
Right. I still think this is someone from the area. And remember, I don't think necessarily the area is limited to just the few thousand people in Delphi. But when we say someone from the area, someone in the surrounding communities of Delphi, someone who is in this farming community. We've talked about the dress, Kelsey had told us that this is very typical dress for someone who is working class or a professional, young or old. And that's another, comment that someone said. We had noted that we think this person is of working class. And by working class, we literally mean someone who works with their hands, who is comfortable with their hands, with either killing or with manipulating things with their hands because of the way they moved and what they were able to accomplish in terms of murdering the two girls in such a quick time frame. And someone had mentioned on a comment, and I think this is very insightful, that in certain small towns that they grew up in, even, working professionals, typically what we describe as white collar, such as doctors, lawyers, bankers, would even dress like that on the weekends or on their time off. Again, I think that's very possible, especially based on what Kelsey told us. But I think our assessment about the social class of this individual is not just based on dress, but rather based on the entire set of factors that led to him meeting these girls and murdering them in such a quick time frame. And one other thing, I think we made this clear in our episodes, but I want to say this again because I feel strongly about this. Someone had said, wanting to defend farmers and that farmers who kill livestock as their living, they're not all murderers. Of course not. We do not think that being a farmer somehow makes you more likely than not to kill. We were merely commenting that a farmer who kills, say, dozens, if not hundreds of chickens at the time of slaughter may be used to the act of killing, are not queasy by the sign of blood, know how to wield a knife in order to end life quickly. Those types of skills we think were implemented here. So that was just an example of someone who is very familiar with those skills, not necessarily that farmers or ranchers who are in the business of slaughtering animals are all more susceptible to becoming serial killers.
And there's always somebody out there looking to be upset or offended by everything we say. But yeah, nobody's saying that all farmers are killers, people. But look, it's hard to stab something to death. It just is. I've never stabbed anything to death. I can't even imagine what that would be like. I think that would be really hard to do, whatever it was. Even cutting the throat of a chicken would be a really difficult thing for me,
So, Brett, shall I tell
lawyer.
a controversial story? Shall I tell a controversial story
Sure.
that may get me some hate mail?
Tell a controversial story.
So I have. I think I've said before that I worked on a farm and have worked, when it was time for slaughtering chickens and how you become desensitized to the act of each step you have to take. But what I didn't tell was the very first chicken I ever had to kill was actually not in the United States. I was staying with a family who had wild chickens, and this was a very remote mountainous area. And this village lived on much less than $1 a day. And, we slept on pallets on the floor, and there were wild chickens, and they were essentially family pets. But of course, only special occasions could you eat these chickens. And so when it was time for me to leave the family, they wanted to honor me by killing one of the chickens so that we could eat the chicken before I left, kind of as a parting dinner. And they gave me the honor of killing the chicken with a machete, which I had to accept because it was a huge honor to do this, except I had never wielded a machete, much less killed a chicken with a machete. And let's just say that it was not a swift death for the chicken. I tried very hard to end the life of this chicken and was not successful. And they are very right when they say that a chicken with its, in this case, head partially cut off will run for a very long time. And someone else had to finish the job for me. So I will say, when you say it is difficult to, stab someone to death, that is actually true. And I only have experience with a very, very small wild chicken.
YouTube's never going to monetize this video now.
We might have to cut that story out. That is really gruesome.
But it's true.
We might have to cut that out.
That is a fact. It's a fact.
I will say I was shocked with how difficult it was.
Yeah. I mean, look,
we really might have to cut that out. That might be way too gruesome.
Well, we'll decide. But it's hard to kill anything. It takes a lot to. I mean, it takes a lot to kill a person, particularly with your bare hands. I mean, I don't know the endless sort of psychology about whether or not. I think James Renner on his podcast, The Philosophy of Crime, has an episode on whether everyone is capable of murder or not, and I don't know if they are or not. Maybe in the right circumstances, maybe the right tool. It's probably easier to shoot somebody than it is to stab somebody than it is to strangle somebody. But this is a violent act, and it's an intentional act. And in this case, it's an act that happened. It's an act that happened without hesitation. I mean, that's another thing to remember here. This person just didn't hesitate. They didn't hesitate at any point in this. I mean, this is a cold-blooded killer. This is somebody who killed without remorse and without hesitation. And it's just hard for me to believe. There's a reason that serial killers start off by torturing animals. You know, I mean, that's just one of the things they do, and it desensitizes them to pain, and they start to get joy out of it. And it transfers from animals to people eventually. And you see that again and again and again. And it doesn't mean that every farmer is a murderer, but it does mean if you're somebody who's killed things before and you've killed with your hands, maybe it is a little bit easier to do, even if it is killing a person. That's all we're saying. Doesn't mean this person will end up being a farmer. Most serial killers aren't. But just given what we know about this person, the way they looked, the way they acted, the speed with which they killed, the fact that we don't really have any indication that they had done this before, I don't know. I mean, I hope one day we know. I hope one day you guys get to all point and laugh at us when it's a Yale-educated lawyer who did this. And, you know, here we are pointing at working class people. But if you're trying to figure out who this is, and you're trying to think about who did this, and you're trying to narrow the pool from 350 million Americans down to whoever this might be, I think it's worth thinking about that kind of stuff. And I'm sure the police and the FBI and everybody else who's looking at this are thinking about those kind of things. Alice, did you have any thoughts about whether or not the sketches represent one person or two people?
So, you know, of course, the first time I saw those two sketches, separate from knowing anything about where they came from, I thought, of course, these are two different people. But as we know, there's so little information that the police have let out here. And I believe the only information they've let out is that they believe this is the same person. Now, of course, many of you aptly point out that the police have not let out very much information. They might be misleading the public. That's all very possible. But I think with such limited information and so many conspiracy theories online, the best I can go with is that these were two different sketches by two different sets of people who described whom the police believe are the same person. Now, we've talked a lot about what sketches are. They're not supposed to be a photographic rendering of the individual. It is the best someone can do based on descriptions of a very subjective storyteller. Every testimony is subjective, right? It's from that person's point of view. And the sketch artist has nothing to go by except the subjective words of an individual, and each person describes the exact same thing differently. If you've ever taken an art class, and you've done one of those exercises where someone is describing, one person is describing, say, a statue they see in front of you, and the artists have to draw based on just the description. The point of this exercise is how wildly different points of views are. And in many instances, you can't even tell that everyone is drawing from the same descriptor, the same person describing one object. Here we know that we have multiple people describing what might be one person. What do you think, Brett?
Well, I think this is complicated by the fact that the police, on the one hand, haven't given us any information, and on the other hand, have given us conflicting information. We know from talking to Kelsey and from hearing from Carter that one version of this is The first sketch that was released, the one with the cap and the older looking person, is secondary. They think it looks more like the second sketch, but don't discard the first sketch, and maybe even it's a combination of the two. There have been other times where members of law enforcement have said things like, well, we actually don't think the person looks like the first sketch because we've interviewed everybody we can find who looks like that sketch, and none of them panned out, so we don't actually think they look like that. We think they look like the younger person. And my understanding is basically, we didn't actually talk about the witness where the second sketch comes from. It's interesting. We say the second sketch. We're talking about the younger sketch. That was actually the first sketch produced, but the police went with the second sketch produced, which is the older gentleman with the cap. That became the first sketch. So that's confusing. Rewind that. Listen to that again. Apparently, the second sketch / first sketch, a woman saw someone while she was walking her dog who looked out of place, and she reported it, and she is the producer of that sketch, I guess. Sort of my vague understanding from the rumors and innuendo I read on places like Reddit. Even if that's the case, though, is it one person or is it two people debate is actually two debates. The first debate is, were there two people involved in the murder, and these are sketches of both those people. There are a lot of people who believe that the person on the bridge lured the girls down the hill, and there was another person waiting under the bridge. Maybe. I don't know why they would do that. The person on the bridge didn't know there was going to be a camera filming him, so there's no real reason for him and his buddy not to cross the bridge together. The police don't think that. I don't think law enforcement hadn't said much, but I think they are pretty clear that there's only one person involved here in this case. I think if there were two people, with everything we know, I don't think both people would have held out this long. I think one of them would have cracked. And I think if the police were able to look for two people, they're more likely to find one of them than they are if they're only looking for one. I just don't think there's two. I can't say that definitively. Certainly when I saw the two sketches the first time, that's what I thought. So I totally understand people who believe that. I'm not criticizing you if you believe that and that's what you think. But two people is two sets of DNA. It's two sets of footprints. It's two sets of fingerprints. It's two people who might be seen by somebody. And we just don't have any evidence of two people traveling together. Everybody who saw anybody, whether they created the first sketch or the second sketch, they only saw one person. So I think the chances that this is two individuals working together is probably pretty slim.
Right, Brett. And, we've talked a lot about holdback evidence. Typically, the number of people involved, especially if it goes from 1 to 2, 1 to 2 is a big change, right? 2 to 3 might not be as big of a change, but that's not the type of holdback evidence typically that police use. Just because it's such a big fact of the crime that it could.
I mean, that would be really stupid if they're holding that back.
It would, right. If that was the holdback evidence, it would be very unwise because it completely changes the way people think about their tips. Remember when we, in the Hinterkaifeck episodes, when we talked about the potentially false tip that Lorenz, who we ultimately thought was the murderer, gave to the police. Remember, he said that he thought it was two people. He gave a tip for two people, and that was a smart false tip because then people start thinking of those who hang in pairs. Typically, if you're going to commit a murder with someone else, if there's two of you, you guys didn't randomly meet for the first time and had no interaction and no communication before. And if you've had communication or if you've met before, other people have probably seen you together or your communications can be traced. And so you can see how the change from 1 to 2 people can completely change the nature of tips coming in and the nature of the investigation. So if in fact there were 2 people and the police were holding that information back, I would be shocked. I would truly be shocked. That would just be a baffling set of choices by police. And I don't think they made that choice here.
I don't either. And we said we're not criticizing the police here. We subtly criticize them, but we absolutely recognize the fact that they are in the middle of a very difficult investigation and they're having to make very difficult choices about what information to release and what information not to release. If they know it's two people and they haven't released that, they should all be fired. I mean, that is insane if they know that. And I can't imagine a circumstance in which they would not tell us if they had evidence that there were two perpetrators involved here. So another thing that was sort of a repeated question that we got, usually from people who weren't as friendly as some of the ones we've talked about earlier, are people who were like, how can you not see that he has a gun in his pocket or a puppy in his jacket or a machete down his pants or whatever? And all I got to say is if you guys see that, then you got better eyes than I do, because I don't see anything like that. I mean, I will admit, we talked about he's wearing too many clothes. And we had one person who tried to argue with us that it actually wasn't that warm that day because it was in the 40s. We said it was in the 40s, and we actually spent a good amount of time talking about how if you've been living in sub-zero temperatures for the winter, when it hits the 40s, you're wearing shorts and a short sleeve shirt. So he is definitely overdressed for the area, particularly if he is from the area. There's no question. He was wearing a lot more clothes than Abby and Libby were, and they're bulky, and there probably are things that he's hiding under his jacket, but there's no way that you can say, there's obviously a gun in his pocket, or there's obviously a machete, or if he obviously has a prosthetic leg. The puppy one is just insane. Did you read the puppy one, Alice? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be critical of the puppy people, but
remind me of the puppy one. There were a lot of comments.
There were people who said that you can clearly make out a puppy that he is hiding in his jacket. I guess to lure the girls in by the, hey, look at my puppy. I mean, he doesn't say, guys, here's my puppy. And what did the puppy do while the murder's going on? And the puppy's barking and, peeing all over the place. And it's just, I mean, I don't know. It's that one, like I said, I'm not trying to mock anybody's theories because we're not into that here. But the puppy theory is one I think we probably can let that one go.
Right. I think any sort of thing that begins with it's obvious and it's not something that the police have let out, I think is probably not obvious, in fact. And so I think it's, again, great that people are trying to see and manipulating the videos to try and get a different angle. That absolutely should work. But the fact of the matter is, you're right. And we've gotten a lot of complaints about this. Why can't we see Bridge Guy better? Why can't the video be better? Why couldn't they stabilize it better? For those of you who may have missed the line, both NASA and Disney came in to help make the video as best as it could be, because remember, Bridge Guy was 65 feet away when Libby started filming. That's very far.
It is. It's a really long way, and it's not a good video. And, there are people who dispute the Disney NASA thing. I don't know. I mean, if you don't think Disney and NASA looked at it, maybe they didn't look at it. I go ahead and tell you, whoever enhanced that video has more capabilities than I have on my computer. So anybody who's trying to tell you that they've got the definitive view, there's only so many pixels there. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much information that was captured in the phone. So no matter what you're doing to enhance that, it's just not possible at some point. And look, I get it. It is so frustrating that we have so much evidence and no suspects. It is incredibly frustrating. But at the end of the day, we just have what we have. We have what we have, and we have to do the best we can. And I think that's one reason we really wanted to harp on thinking about the personality and not the person. Some people said, you could stare at that video all day and it's not going to make any difference. You're probably right. You probably could. You could probably look at the sketches all day and not know. I really think you got to think about who this is and what kind of person this is, and try and think about whether you saw somebody or know anybody like that. We had one person who commented that they had an unusual experience there, and they were trying to decide whether or not to send that tip in because they thought it probably wasn't a big deal. And I told them, do it. You can't hurt anything. And I think that's absolutely true. Send those tips in. Your tip might be the one that makes the difference. along these same lines, and this is something that's going to be controversial, but we're going to talk about it anyway. I'll probably be inflammatory. Alice will be her normal, calm, rational self. But we got a lot of comments that were basically, you need to watch this YouTube video because it's this person, and everybody knows it because this guy is a drug dealer. He's a meth dealer in town. And Libby's father had turned state evidence on him, and he knew that, and he killed the girls in revenge to punish him for that. And we got a lot of comments along those lines. And I just wanted to talk about that theory. Look, and you guys who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention the guy's name because we said we weren't going to talk about suspects, and we're not going to talk about suspects. But let's just walk through this. If it is the case that people online have figured this out and they have identified a suspect and they know exactly why he did what he did, they know where he was, they know there was a meth lab under the bridge. That's one of the things people say. They know that he's somebody that Libby's dad had testified against. Apparently, some people go as far, and I actually think this is despicable, so you people are despicable who say this, that the family knows this and they're covering it up, which is absurd. I mean, it's just absurd. I'm not even gonna, whatever. You people just go away. But if all that were true, and all this information were out there, and the police knew that, there's no way they wouldn't have arrested this person at this point. There's no way we wouldn't have had a press conference about this. If you guys know all that information, the police have all this information we've talked about that they haven't released, they would be able to tie this thing to that person if they had done it. I mean, Alice, how hard would it be to get a search warrant for this person's property and their phone and everything else if any of that were true?
I could draft it right now in under 10 minutes. And it would be granted, because that type of information, if it's in the police file, if they know there's testimony, there's some tie, there's some reason for there to be an enemy of the family or these girls, and the police have a record of it, absolutely you have probable cause for a search warrant. And that search warrant will probably lead to direct evidence, if not very strong circumstantial evidence, to be able to file a complaint or to indict these guys or guy and to arrest him. So the family has no to suggest that the family would be covering something up like this, I think is just devastating to hear, because it's easy to say these sorts of things online, but if you are hearing that as the family, I can't imagine anything more devastating. And we see this type of damaging theories in our own cases. And that's why I think we feel so strongly about this. But
I mean, does anybody really think that if Kelsey knew who did this, she wouldn't tell the police? Does anybody actually believe that?
She is spending her entire life, literally her entire life, she's studying criminal justice because she wants to make a difference for other families who've had to go through what she has gone through, what her sister has gone through. I do not think for a moment that if she knew who did this, she would be doing all these interviews and talking to the police and studying criminal justice and devoting her life not only to the entire profession, but to her sister and to Abby's cause, and hold back the key piece of evidence that could find their killer. I do not think that is possible.
And the next step in this conspiracy theory, and that's what it is, it's a conspiracy theory, is that all that's true. Obviously, the police would know it, so the police must be involved. The police are covering this up. They're covering this up for this. They're protecting this drug dealer for reasons that are never really made clear, but it's like, well, there's lots of drugs in Delphi, and there's lots of drugs in Kokomo, which is a city nearby, and everything's very corrupt, and everybody's in on it, and that's why they're doing this, because they know if this guy gets arrested, he's going to have information on the police, and he's going to use that information, and all these people are going to go down, or whatever. This is the theory that's out there, and let's just talk about that for a second. I don't know anything about Delphi. I never lived in Delphi. Haven't lived in Kokomo. Those places may be horrible, drug-ridden places. But I will tell you, where I came from, where I grew up, was an incredibly corrupt place, like incredibly corrupt. And drugs were endemic there. And it was situated in such an area where a lot of the drugs that came from one of the big cities and went to another big city went through where I lived. And so there were a lot of people who were involved in drugs. And because of that, a lot of people in the county that I'm from disappear to this day, mysteriously. They get blown up a lot. One person, just growing up, there was somebody whose truck was blown up when they put their blinker on. Truck blew
and
up.
when Brett says blew up, he literally means blown up, like with a bomb.
Yeah, they're blown up, right, with a bomb. Somebody who lived next door to one of my best friends was blown up on their lawnmower. I had one of my good friends. I would go over to his house, and I never really understood why his father had so many guns and knives, and why he spent most of his time in the back room where he had all of these televisions set up with all of these different cameras that covered basically the entire property. And it turned out he was one of the county's biggest meth dealers, and he, much like the situation that's often described in Delphi, had a lot of people in his pocket, and that was one of the reasons he didn't get arrested. But the DEA didn't care, and the DEA came in and they arrested him, and he went away for the rest of his life. So here's the thing about this case. It may be the case. I don't know that it is, and I'm not saying that it is. It may be the case that everybody in Delphi is corrupt, that the entire police department is corrupt, that they're all in the pockets of various small-time meth dealers. That is not true of the Indiana State Police. It is certainly not true of the FBI, and I'll tell you who else it's not true of. It's not true of the press. If it were true that members of the police department were covering up the violent, brutal murders of 2 young girls at the hands of a local meth dealer, people would leave their press job at the White House to go break that story. That is the kind of story that you win a Pulitzer Prize for, and you become famous for, and you write a book, and you make a lot of money on. There is simply no way that that kind of conspiracy could be kept silent. It is impossible. Impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have anything else to say there, Brett, because that sort of conspiracy here is just, especially with the number of different jurisdictions that are involved. We've talked about how it's the local with the state, with the federal agencies working together to solve this case. Now, it would be very difficult to have a massive cover-up that integrates every level of law enforcement in this country. It would be a feat that the largest conspiracies of our time the largest conspiracies in history have not been able to pull off. So I just don't think that this is that type of a cover-up.
I mean, look, guys, the president of the United States can't keep his taxes secret, right? Like the New York Times got a hold of his taxes. Do you really think that some small-time meth dealer, and that's what this is, if you believe that this person did it, he's nothing. He's not important. No one is afraid of him. There's no meth dealer in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, that anyone is afraid of. It's just not true. It's not possible. They would crush him like a bug. That's what they would do. Or they would find him and they'd kill him. I mean, even if you think there's some sort of crazy corruption here, he'd be dead by now. There's no way that some small-time meth dealer, pedophile, child murderer is going to get away with this and nothing happened to him. It's just not going to happen. So I love the enthusiasm, and I love that people have dug into this. And yeah, he looks a lot like the sketch. And yeah, he sounds a lot like the voice. It's probably not him. Maybe it's him. But if it's him, it's not it'll be solved eventually, probably very soon. And there won't be any grand conspiracy to cover it up. So as much as I would like to think we're this close to getting there and it's this guy and all we need is an arrest, I don't think we're there. I don't think we're there. And I really don't think that it's going to end up being this person as much as we would like to see this case solved. Turning to another theory, a lot of you really really believe that this is an internet-related crime. A lot of you really think that this was something that was set up, that the girls communicated with someone, that person lured them to the trails, found them there, and murdered them. We talked about this some in our episodes. I really think the only piece of information that supports that is the fact that Libby wiped her phone 10 days earlier. And Alice pointed out, and I think this is still true, and I really think this is the best rebuttal to that, 10 days is an eternity in a young girl's life. If she had wiped that phone the day before or that morning, then I'm much closer to being on the same page as you. But 10 days, it's hard for me to believe that she would not have made contact with this person within those 10 days. It's just hard for me to believe. And if there were some sort of internet trail, I think the police would have followed that by now. They have the phone. Frankly, you can wipe a phone. There's a lot of things we can do to get at that information. So I just don't think that's going to be the answer. Alice, I don't know if you have any strong feelings about that or not.
Yeah, I think, you summarized what I said in our episodes very well. 10 days, and go back and listen to it, is a very long time to not communicate with the love of your life, especially at that age. And remember, they had to meet up that day. What if plans changed? What if there had been a snow day and they didn't get that day off between those 10 days? It's February still in Indiana. There could have been a snow day during that time. There could have been a storm that blew in. How were they going to communicate with each other that they were no longer meeting up? What about once they got to the drop-off point? They didn't have a ride till that morning. What if the drop-off time was an hour later or an hour earlier? I just think it's very unlikely that the wipe of the phone 10 days previously was to cover up and to hold secret a plan for 10 days.
And remember, what Kelsey says is that initially, when the girls asked her for a ride, she said no. And then she reconsidered that and came back to them and said, okay, I'll give you a ride. Once she said no, the natural thing to do would be to text the person or send them a Snapchat or whatever and say, sorry, I can't get a ride. My sister sucks or whatever. I'm not going to be there. That would have been the natural thing to do. That didn't happen. Or if it did happen, we don't have any evidence of it. So it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. There's a lot of ways to communicate these days that are encrypted and everything else.
Well, law enforcement still has the ability to find encrypted messages. Encrypted, I think, is a lot broader than what we think it means. We think encrypted means it goes out into the ether and cannot be read or captured by anyone. That's not quite true. You should go read the privacy statements and the agreements that you click on your phone when you download an encrypted app. Think about it this way. If you are able to open your phone right now and read a text that has not been disappeared from an encrypted app, then the police can do the same. Even if you've set it to delete, there are software systems that law enforcement have to recover recently deleted, not even that recent, really something that's been deleted in the past few months. That is an available technology, not just to law enforcement, to hackers as well. And so I do think that kind of the best technology, we've talked about NASA and Disney coming in, the best technology have been brought to bear on this case. And I would imagine they've also made use of electronic forensics to capture any sort of communications these girls may have had and any sort of leads that would have given them.
Yeah, we can read your Snapchats, guys. So if you think they're actually disappearing, they're not. If we can get into your phone, we can basically read anything that you've sent. If your phone's encrypted, like Apple, if your phone's locked, that's rough for us in law enforcement. I mean, it's hard. It's basically impossible to break into your phone. But if we can get into your phone, it's all there. And we have her phone, and we can read everything on her phone. So the chances that there's anything on her phone that law enforcement has not seen, pretty slim. Not saying it's not possible. Happy to eat my words if law enforcement breaks the case and that's how they do it. But it's one thing that's weird about this case. There's so much uncertainty, and yet there are so many people who seem like they are so sure about what happened. And like Alice said, whenever you think it's so obvious X, Y, or Z, it's probably not in this case. It's just not. You can have good theories and you can have good arguments behind those, but I would just say don't become so blinded by your own certainty that you ignore other possibilities. I'm not ignoring the possibility that they met somebody online. It's possible, especially in this day and age. But when I counter that against the other evidence and what we know about human nature and what we know about the girls and what we know about teenage girls in general, it's just hard for me to believe that that's what happened. So the last thing we want to talk about is not really about the case. So if you're not interested in anything beyond the case, you can turn off the podcast now. We'll see you next week. But it's about something weird that happened in this case. And it gives us an opportunity to sort of talk about how we do things and how this podcast is structured. We got some criticism. I guess that's how I would describe it. Criticism. So, I just get to tell you what happened. The podcast is going. We're a couple episodes in. We're overwhelmed by the response. It's incredible. I mean, people are listening to it at a rate we've never had before. We're getting all these responses, all these great emails, all these great thoughts and criticisms and thoughts about the case and ideas about the case. And I tweet about it and I say, man, it's incredible. You guys are so great. We've gotten so much great response. And I got a response to that tweet from someone named Sandy. And I'm going to read you what they tweeted. They said, I heard that your podcast is just you reading the Reddit timeline on air without crediting the person that created that awesome timeline. Is that true? Which, very passive-aggressive, Sandy, I got to say. And so my response to that tweet, and I was taken aback by that because I just didn't expect that. And my response to that tweet was, twofold, really. Number one, we do credit the person who created that timeline. We link to it on the website very prominently with their name. And they didn't know this at the time because we were only 2 episodes in, but we actually credit them at the end of the podcast where we mention their name and thank them for all the good work that they did on that timeline. But, whatever. And I responded and moved on. And then last week, after the podcast is finished and the follow-up episode is finished, we get another tweet. And it's from somebody who says that we copy and pasted their timeline to our website. And they were very upset about that. And I had no idea who they were or what timeline they were talking about. They didn't say the Delphi timeline. So I just asked them, who are you and which timeline are you talking about? And sorry if we did that. We'd love to give you credit. And turned out it was the author of the Reddit Delphi timeline. And so I pointed out to them that we did not copy and paste their timeline. We linked to their timeline on Reddit with their name. Here's the thing about this. We always cite our sources, and we got a lot of them. We read a lot. We read a lot on Reddit. We listen to a lot of podcasts. We read a lot of articles. Occasionally we're reading books. We're watching documentaries. And you guys know, we're always talking about that stuff because that's where we're getting it from. We are not investigative journalists. We're not going to Delphi and interviewing everybody in this case. We are not creating out of whole cloth a new timeline based on our firsthand encounters with people who were there. We are taking the public material and we are applying the sort of expertise that we've developed and the training that we've had to that public material to try and reach some sort of conclusion, hopefully entertain you, and maybe add something to the case. That's what we are trying to do. So if there was anybody out there who didn't know that that's what we were doing, we just want to say that. And we want to say we are always going to cite our sources, but we're not going to stop having sources. This person who created this timeline, unfortunately, was so upset by the fact that we linked their timeline and it changed. At first it was, we copy and pasted it. I pointed out we didn't do that. Then they were like, well, you linked to it without asking my permission. And I said, I was sorry. I didn't realize I was supposed to ask their permission to link to a public document, at which point they made it private. So the timeline that we used and we talked about on the podcast and we told you should go check out, you can no longer check it out because the person who made it presumably to help solve this case, made it private. I guess they're sitting somewhere with their computer looking at their timeline, but that's the only person who can look at it.
Brett, what a travesty. It truly is a travesty because, we said from day one, the nature of true crime podcasts and true crime genre is voyeuristic. But one thing we've tried to do is to have our experience bear upon it so that we can add value to the cases, to the victims' families, and to those who may know something that could solve these cold cases. And I mean, really, what an incredible resource this timeline has been to many people. And I could only imagine that someone would spend this much time assembling public materials and rearranging it so that others would not have to start from ground zero and, say, reinvent the wheel. The purpose is so that we can stand on each other's shoulders, so that we can get closer to what we think is the truth or closer to an answer. We want these murders to be solved. We want Kelsey to have an answer. We want our family to have an answer. The community of Delphi to have an answer for these girls. We're not doing this just because it's good podcasting. We've mentioned before, it was absolutely gut-wrenching to read and prepare for those episodes. It was really surprising to us that so many of you listened. But that's really not why we did the show, especially not for these 4 episodes. We've told you how these girls gripped our hearts and minds, and I think that's the same for many of you out there, and that's why you listened. And it's because of the senselessness of their murders. Now, as anyone who creates things, such as journalists, but we're not saying we're journalists, they go and assemble what's available out there in terms of information so they can then expound upon the information. That's what we did here, and that's honestly what everyone should be doing. We have said to other podcasters out there that if our podcast is a good jumping off point for you to then offer your expertise or angle or to critique us, go for it. Please do. This is information that we're putting out there so that we can reach hopefully more people and think about things in a different light. Each person has a different perspective and expertise that they can bring to this case. No way do we think that our podcast is the end-all, be-all, and no one can ever refer to it or use it off as a jumping-off point for their own viewpoints. And so I really think that the fact that this timeline issue became a strange, petty fight online and ended in the creator making it private to be just a real travesty. And honestly, I think it gives the true crime community a bad name. We've already said before at the beginning of this episode that the majority of your comments on these Delphi episodes have been incredibly insightful and civil, and that's how the majority of the community acts. So again, thank you for those of you who are pushing against behavior that does not advance the ultimate goal that most of us are here for, which is solving the murders for the victims, for their families and communities.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm looking at our outline right now for Delphi, which includes excerpts from that timeline. It is 3,000 words long. It is 9 pages long. To give you an idea of how long it would take us to read this, we did a short at the end of Delphi to recap what we thought had happened. That script that we just read, we read that script, was 1,000 words long. It took us 7.5 minutes. Our outline's 3,000 words long. We don't just read the outline. We are trying to offer additional information. And like Alice said, I hope people are using our podcast. I hope our podcast is helpful to those of you out there who have podcasts or writing articles or posting about this case or thinking about this case. Use it. Use it all you want. Quote us. Take excerpts from it. Play it on your own podcast. Link to our podcast. Whatever you want to do, that's fine. None of that, we've had plagiarism problems in the true crime community. That is not plagiarism. That is not plagiarism. Plagiarism would be taking our script, reading our script, and acting like it was your own. That's plagiarism. Citing our podcast is not plagiarism.
Which would be hard, by the way, because you would need to mispronounce words the way that we do.
Exactly. It'd be almost impossible. Nobody could pull that off. That's why we mispronounce words all the time. It's really, we're just doing that on purpose to protect our production. So I just want to say, I have no doubt this person is either listening to this podcast or will hear about it. Make your timeline public again. It was helpful for a reason. I can't tell you how many people on our website clicked on that timeline, went to Reddit, read the timeline, which was much more thorough than what we went through, learned more about this case. And wouldn't it be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if somebody went to our website, clicked on that timeline, read the timeline, and thought, this reminds me of something, and called in a tip and solved the case? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that make it all worth it? And that's what this is about. Like Alice said, we want people to enjoy our podcast. We want people to listen to our podcast. We want them to share our podcast. We want to have tons of downloads. We want all that. But at the end of the day, what we want more than any of that is for one person to listen to this podcast and think, I know something, and make the call. That's what we want more than anything. And we're all in this together, and we're not enemies, and we need to work together on this and put the pettiness aside. So I just wanted to say that, get that out there. We said a lot in this follow-up episode. You guys probably have thoughts. We're looking forward to hearing those thoughts. We're looking forward to all you folks on YouTube giving us some comments. Our contact information, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all the various social medias. We're on Reddit. We're on Patreon. If you guys want to support us on Patreon, doing some good things there. We're about to release our merchandise. It's very exciting. Alice is working on that even as we're recording this. So get yourself a shirt when it comes out. One thing I want to say before we go is the tip line number. I want to share that again, 844-459-5786. It is anonymous. If you have a tip, no matter how frivolous you think it is, I hope you'll share it. Well, Alice, this has been fun as always. Do you have anything else to add before we sail off into the sunset?
Thank you guys so much for the great responses, and just keep up the thinking outside of the box comments. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. This case, like I said before, we were not excited about doing this case because it really hits home. We got young kids, and it's just hard to even think about this stuff. But this has been easily the most fulfilling case that we've done, and it's all because of you guys and how much you care about this case, and that's what's going to solve it eventually. That's all we've got for now. Thank you again for all your feedback. We'll be back soon, but until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Imagine, again, standing on a football field and filming at the 65, there's no 55, the 15-yard line towards the opposite end goal. Did I even get that right? No.
It's not that far. It's like, filming from the goal line to
right.
the 25-yard line or something.
I can't.
3 feet in the air.
I can't think right now.
It's okay.
I really shouldn't do multiple things at one time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined with my incomparable host. me try that again.
Is the if for me? You shouldn't have.
Okay.
Oh,
do that
right.
again.
Go ahead.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.